Something I've noticed about the gaming community is that we love good stories. Most outsiders looking in think that it's all about the gameplay or the art design, and those things are very, very important, don't get me wrong, but when you really sit down and think about it, I mean, at least for me, the best games that I've ever played, or at least the ones that have stuck with me after a long period of time, like after I'm done playing them, well, those are the games that have a rich and compelling story. Why am I bringing this up as an indie game developer? Well, the knowledge of the importance of story in other games set the precedent that there needed to be a very compelling story in mine, and luckily I had a head start. The Summoner's Nexus TCG is focused on pre-game strategy and real-time decision making. It's an indie digital card game that is, well, being made by me, an indie game developer / designer. I've been working on it since 2021. There is a website, tons of content out on the game if you want to learn about it. I will leave links to that in the description. Hopefully soon you'll be able to find out where, when, and how you can play the game for yourselves. Well, all of that gameplay stuff is good and fine, but how does that tie back into the game's story? Well, the interesting thing about my game is that the story actually came first, before the idea to make a game ever even entered my mind. You see, before I made Summoner's Nexus, I was a Yu-Gi-Oh content creator. Nothing massive, but I had carved out this nice little space for myself within my niche. People who have been around for a while probably know that already. In fact, a good chunk of you are probably from the Saul Plays Anime channel, but people who have been around for longer know that a couple months into creating that channel, I decided to create a dramatized Yu-Gi-Oh fan fiction that was going to be like this story-based thing that I released in videos. It was going to be voice acted. I was going to have art done for it. It was awesome. The plan was to write an original story and then use Yu-Gi-Oh Master Duel as like the engine to facilitate the duels where I didn't have animation. I was going to get Japanese voice actors, hire them to do the lines, and like share the character thoughts and ideas that I wanted to bring to life in that story. Like, I put a lot of work into creating that fan fiction, but at the end of the day, it was just a fan fiction. For those of you who are in like deep into the Soul Plays Anime community, think of it like a beta version of what Yu-Gi-Oh! Advance ended up becoming before that became Nexus 101. Genuinely, so much work went into telling that original story. I remember I did character designs and models. I got voice acting, like I said. I found webtoon artists and had them do specific panels to make like very dramatized scenes, and then I realized I could just make the whole thing a webtoon, and so I started working towards doing that, putting a full webtoon out for this series. I was ridiculously excited. A few months went by and I started getting art back from the artists, and I started looking in to see which voice actors that I would use. I started recording some of the duels. I knew I was putting all of this work in, but my thinking was that I wouldn't be copyright struck because I wasn't using any of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Original characters. I wasn't using any of the original decks, which eventually changed later, but that didn't matter in the long run. And I was only really using the cards and telling an original story within the same universe, effectively, which was my biggest hang-up. You see, in the back of my mind, I couldn't escape this idea that at the end of the day, I'm putting all of this work into someone else's intellectual property, into someone else's idea, right? Even though I'm making my own characters, my own story, my own plot, even my own power system, effectively, it didn't really matter because it was still within the Yu-Gi-Oh! Universe. It was still within the Yu-Gi-Oh! IP, and so there was only so much that I would ever be able to do with it. Like, yes, there was a massive pro in that there was a guaranteed fan base. People who like Yu-Gi-Oh! Might inadvertently find my story and end up liking it, which was very nice to have, but what if this ended up becoming something big, something that I wanted to do something with? What if I got copyright struck or shut down after investing so much into this project? For a while, I tried to just push those thoughts aside because I didn't see an alternative. I ran a Yu-Gi-Oh! Channel. Everyone who was on my channel was there for Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. I couldn't really imagine doing something else at the time. The story was already written around the Yu-Gi-Oh! IP, and in truth, I was scared, right? Scared to leave that guaranteed safety net that was the Yu-Gi-Oh! Extended universe, if you want to call it that. I knew that people would be at least somewhat interested in my story on that basis, and I was scared to let it stand on its own 2 feet. More than that, though, this story had already been written, and it had been written around the characters playing a game. Like, that was a fundamental aspect of the story at the time, anyway. I felt stuck for a very long while because I couldn't think of any other way to do things until, and I'll never forget this, one night I'm lying in bed at like 3 a.m. I'm staring at the ceiling in the dark. I had just been on my computer for hours, you know, just getting a bunch of work done, and then I'm finally going to rest, but my mind is racing, and the problem comes back to the forefront of my mind, and I just have a thought. If I can't use their game, then why can't I just make my own? Like, if the characters have to play a game, why don't I just make one? That was the reason Summoner's Nexus was created, not necessarily to be a game that people could play, but to be the game that facilitates the story that I was trying to tell. So I immediately started brainstorming ideas, writing things down. It was honestly, that night is a blur in my mind because so much happened. The series was called Heart of the Cards, you know, as an homage to Yu-Gi-Oh! But that night, I remember I ended up changing the name of the series to Heart of the Summoner. I started pulling together concepts from a project that I'd been working on back when I was in college, and I workshopped that into the first ever, like, rough version of the Summoner's Nexus game board. I called my girlfriend at the time, yes, at 3 in the morning, and I just started losing my mind because even though I didn't know what it was eventually going to look like, that was the beginning of everything that you see for Summoner's Nexus that we have today. Now, at this point, I had already commissioned some art on Fiverr, so I had to have that redone to remove all of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Focused elements, and then I had to go through the story and effectively reskin it to not include the Yu-Gi-Oh! Parts anymore, which was surprisingly easy looking at it in hindsight. The game that they were playing did not matter at all. The story could still be told perfectly. If anything, I could tell the story better because now I had full control over the mechanics of the game that were being like explored as we went through the series, so the characters could literally do anything that I wanted them to do. I knew that my existing audience at the time wouldn't really care about a series like this, though, something that strayed so far away from the realm of Yu-Gi-Oh! So I scrapped the idea to have it be a voice acted thing on YouTube and went all in on creating a webtoon for it. I did all the research on how to make a successful webtoon and decided that I would commission art for the first 50 chapters of the webtoon. That way I had a guaranteed release schedule for at least about a year to feed the webtoon algorithm. Now, no one advised me to do it that way. The advice was to always be consistent, but I like to be extra prepared. I hate starting something and not being able to finish, which has happened quite a lot, but we've made it to where we are. I remember from there on out, all of my money was going into creating this series. Everything that I had went into it, so much so that I actually stopped making content in order to get a full-time job to keep the series funded. There were obviously other reasons at the time, but that was one of them. This was actually around the time where it finally hit me, as it probably hit you somewhere along the lines of watching this video, in that I made a fully functioning game in order to tell this story. It has rules, mechanics, cards, and systems. So why have I not tried to play it myself yet? This was the moment that the Summoner's Nexus TCG started to take form, right? I got art from the webtoon and started workshopping it into cards. I started planning on how I could potentially bring this into the real world. Soon enough, I was looking for developers on Fiverr to help me start building, but I quickly realized that I could not afford to facilitate the development of a game and also hiring artists to complete the webtoon. So I knew that one of these two projects would need to be sacrificed, and I ended up sacrificing the webtoon. Here's the thing though, as difficult as that decision was to make, I think that decision ended up saving both projects, and it's the reason why today I think my game has a story system that I'm just so happy with. I'm so pleased with it, and it is leagues better than it would have been had I not made that choice. Stopping work on the webtoon didn't mean giving up on the story as a whole. It just meant that I could write a book instead, which would be free, still tell the story, and then be able to focus on the game. But the awesome thing about that is that since I had already commissioned some of the panels for it, my game had a story mode, a comic-based story mode that people could go in and get an abridged version of the book, effectively. Because I had been trying to beat the algorithm and commission 50 panels at once, I hadn't commissioned them in order. I had had one artist do parts of the beginning, someone do parts of the middle, and someone do parts of the end. That way I would never fall behind on releases, and as a result of that, I had enough to tell a somewhat cohesive version of the book's story. I think that's probably one of the things that I'm happiest about, that all of that effort didn't go to waste and instead set the stage for the Summoner's Nexus TCG to be elevated even higher in terms of its quality. It works just like Webtoon, where you go in, you scroll through, you have music that will play for certain scenes to sort of set the tone, and this actually led to a few more comic panels being created for individual lore, for the individual decks in the game. Like the different subsets will also sometimes have their own comic or story as part of the game, and it all started from there. So, changing the format of the story is what ultimately ended up saving both the story and the game, turning it into the amazing project that you see before you now. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, like what you heard, subscribe to the channel for more updates on development for the game, for a chance to play, you know, figuring out where and when things are going to be released, and leave a like because it helps more people to find the game, and more people finding the game means more players, which means more fun for everyone involved. With that being said, have a wonderful day and take care. Bye.